Hi, I'm Mario Ariave with Utmost Performance Coaching. For today's video, I'm going to start with a little story. We're going to travel over to the NFL, the National Football League, and we're specifically going to be talking about the Detroit Lions and their head coach, Dan Campbell. Now, if you don't know much about him, I'm just going to give you a quick little bit of information, and then we're going to jump into the topic for today's video. Dan Campbell, the coach of the Detroit Lions. First of all, Detroit Lions went in as the number one seed in the NFC. They were the top seed, so they had a bye in the first round and just played great all season, led by their coach, Dan Campbell. If you see any videos or know anything about him, he was a guy that had tremendous energy, tremendous passion. He would show it, his emotions on his sleeve. He was very charismatic. And he was able to lead his team to the number one seed in the NFC. They played at a very high level. He was able to motivate those players and get those players to do some fantastic things. And they had a fantastic season. Now, fast forwarding to the playoffs. They had a bye in the first round and they were able to play their first playoff game. And they were heavy favorites to win this particular game. As a matter of fact, the Detroit Lions were the favorites to win the Super Bowl. But they lost this game, and so therefore, they're out of the playoffs. Their season is over. And what I wanted to use for the topic of our discussion today was Dan Campbell's post-game conference after that game. So many people have known Dan Campbell as a fiery guy, a passionate guy, a guy that gets his players motivated, gets them up for the game, and gets them to do tremendous and fantastic things on the field. But Dan Campbell's post-game interview after this loss, he had his head down. He had a cap on. He had his head down. He didn't make eye contact with the reporters. And he was very somber. He was speaking in a very low tone. And he was very, very down on himself. He was very emotional. But in the other direction now. This was a side that people had not seen of Dan Campbell. Very low. 2 times at the end of this clip that I saw, 2 times he said, "It's my fault. It's my fault." And so I want to stop and I want to apply this to us here. What I wanted to talk about today was more on the mental and the emotional side of performance. So we're not going to talk X's and O's today in terms of physiology. What we're going to talk about is, how do you feel when a workout or a race doesn't go the way that you had hoped it would? You had a certain expectation. The Detroit Lions, Dan Campbell, had a certain expectation for his team. More than likely, it was to win the Super Bowl, to win it all. But they obviously fell short of that expectation. What about for us? How do you feel when you have an expectation for a workout? Your coach has laid out metrics. Here you go. Here's what you should do to get better today. And you fall short. Or you're in conversation back and forth with your coach. You guys get some goals in place, some things that you want to do. And you fall short of that. You know, I have a question that I send out to my athletes, and it very simply asks, what would you consider a successful performance? And they get that before a competitive event. And then they have to answer that question. That's going to give an expectation as to what that athlete, what are you looking for? And then how do you respond when you don't get that expectation? Now, this is important because, again, I want to kind of go back to Dan Campbell, and I think he's a fantastic individual, but here's the deal. When your highs are high, your lows are going to be low. We've seen Dan Campbell oftentimes, many times, on a fantastic high. He's running around, he's loud, he's very charismatic, and that's great when it's working for you. But then obviously we've also seen a low now out of Dan Campbell that we maybe hadn't seen before. It's my fault. It's my fault. Now, is it okay to have these kinds of thoughts and these kinds of feelings after a performance that falls short or a workout that falls short of your expectation? I would say to a certain extent, yes, it is. We care about our performance. We care about it deeply. We want to be successful. We want to meet those expectations that we've set out for ourselves. But We've got to be careful that we don't allow that falling short of that expectation to swing us too far into this rut and this hole where we fail to actually use the failure to meet that expectation to actually learn and to grow and to get better. We can go to the other side of things. A lot of times that exhilaration and that happiness and that contentment and that feeling of satisfaction that we get maybe from meeting those expectations, exceeding those expectations, achieving our goals. Once again, we've got to be careful that we don't swing that all the way to the point where we just say, oh, met the expectation, got it done, achieved my goal, great. Wait a minute. Did we learn from it? Is there something we can take from that? Of course there is, that we can use to learn and to grow and to get better. So what's the answer to all of this? How should we be? Where should we be? Well, as a coach, I try to keep my athletes focused on what are we doing? What do we need to do? What are the actionable steps that we need to perform? And getting to the point where we're living right here in this middle ground. We're not too high. We're not too low. We're just right here in the middle in a sweet spot where it's like, what do we need to do? What things do we need to execute? And then we execute and we don't execute. And then we just ask some good questions and we look at it and then we say, okay, and then we move on. Essentially kind of becoming a little bit kind of like robotic. There are tasks and we're just going to keep moving through them. That's going to help us. That's going to keep us in this place where we don't get too high, we don't get too low, because I want to end with this. The Detroit Lions came in as the #1 seed in the NFC. The Detroit Lions were the odds favorites to win the Super Bowl. Now, how did they get there? They got there over an 18-game season where they performed well in a consistent manner. In other words, did this one performance that fell short of their expectations, should Dan Campbell, should he feel that that defines his team and his performance individually as a coach? The answer is absolutely not. So for us, a missed workout, a workout where we don't hit our expectation, a performance that falls short of our expectations, should that define us? Should we hang our hat on that performance and should we walk around with the it's my fault? This is, I guess I'm not fit. I guess I'm not as good as I was, or whatever other thoughts you may be having. If you're being consistent and you're putting in the training, and every now and again, for some reason, again, something you've got a conversation you have to have with your coach, you fall short of your expectation, that's okay. As a matter of fact, we have to be careful that the expectation shouldn't be perfection and hitting the mark every time, because that's not going to happen. We're going to fall short at some point. We're going to not hit a workout at some point. We're going to not get what we wanted in terms of an outcome in a competition or an event at some point. So we need to be careful, because that's how we can begin to get into these outer extremes mentally and emotionally. All right, there we have it. That's what we got for you today. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. I appreciate you guys. I hope that you guys are getting something out of this content that you can take with you. If you guys are enjoying this, please subscribe to the channel. There'll be more coming. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. Until next time.